2024 was not a good NASCAR season for the two-time NASCAR champion Kyle Busch. We'll take a look back at 2024 and analyze why the statistics were not up to par with previous years and what could Kyle Busch do going into 2025. Could he be poised for a comeback or could it stay as bad as it was this year? Let's analyze it. Hello everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and let's talk a little bit of NASCAR off-season news. The news has been a little slight. We've seen some moves around RCR, but no big announcements going into the 2025 NASCAR season yet. There's been some rumors of some playoff format changes. Of course, if that comes out, we'll break that all down. But right now, I just had an idea. Kyle Busch has been a hot topic this offseason, obviously coming off of his worst year ever, his worst statistical year ever, 2024. His first year without a win. The win streak is over. It ends at 19. It will not hit 20, unfortunately for him. And then, of course, going into 2025, what could RCR do? Austin Dillon, Kyle Busch. Can Kyle Busch sort of make a comeback and get back to winning races? And I think it's possible. But let's sort of take a deeper dive into everything that happened. So let's start out by looking back at 2024, right? Or even go back to 2023. Kyle Busch gets 3 wins early in the season, all in the first half of the 2023 season, and then it falls off. Kyle Busch has not won a race since Gateway, St. Louis, back in the summer of 2023. So it's been quite some time since Kyle Busch, one of the best drivers in NASCAR history, 63 career wins, 2 championships, has won a NASCAR Cup Series event, which is certainly very interesting to see, right? So we ended out that 2023 season and things got rough for RCR. Richard Childress, the driver of the 8 team, the speed declined. The mistakes began to happen. The pit crew started to make more mistakes. And then we entered that 2024 season and it was a disaster from the green flag in Daytona. The pit crew started making mistakes. They made a big mistake in Las Vegas, potentially costing Kyle Busch the win. A big mistake in that Daytona 500 where a wheel fell off that cost Kyle Busch valuable track position at that time. That could have potentially cost him a Daytona 500. So very frustrating 2024 season for that 2-time NASCAR champion, 63-time race winner. Once again, completed all the races with 0 wins, 10 top 10s, 5 top 5s, fewest ever by Kyle Busch. 5 DNFs, but there were a few instances where Kyle Busch did have mistakes and hit the wall, crashed, and that's very upsetting to see by Kyle Busch. But what can Kyle Busch do moving forward, right? Obviously, 2024 was a disaster, but I want to take a look at a bit of a period that was a bit of an increase for Kyle Busch, which we have not seen since that summer race in St. Louis in 2023, right? It's been a decline ever since for the driver of the number 8, but there was a little spark there after the All-Star break, at the Olympic break going into Richmond, where Austin Dillon showed a lot of speed in another RCR car, and he actually won that race, did not go in the playoffs for some reasons, but did not actually won that race. Kyle Busch finished in the 12th position. Then we went to Michigan after that. Kyle Busch was very much in contention for the win, led a lot of laps, used a little bit of strategy, but couldn't quite hold off Tyler Reddick and a few other guys to finish in the top 10. I believe he finished 4th in that event. Then we went to Daytona. Kyle Busch finished 2nd in a heartbreaking loss. We went to Darlington, that final race of the regular season, and Kyle Busch finished 2nd again to Chase Briscoe, where he was so close to catching him but couldn't quite get it. So a lot of close calls for Kyle Busch, right? You go back to Kansas when Kyle Busch was clearly the favorite to win the race at one point, was faster than Ross Chastain, was leading the race, and then made an uncharacteristic mistake and wrecked after a block from Chase Briscoe. Very unfortunate for Kyle Busch. But I wonder what he can do moving forward. There's been some crew chief changes. Kyle Busch will obviously still be with the same crew chief. Ben Bayshore will be on top of the pit box once again for the 2025 season. That will be their 3rd season together. And I'm confident. I'm confident that Kyle Busch can go out there and put together some numbers. He's had a lot of close calls in 2024. But really, I think the big thing for this team is cleaning things up. And they did a good job at that the second half of the season after the Olympic break. I think this offseason they can really ramp things up and they'll be ready to go in Daytona, right? When everything's going bad, when everything's going awful for this race team, you can go back and point at a lot of different things and analyze what you need to fix, and that can sometimes excel a team to be back to winning standard, right? In NASCAR, I go back to RFK as the biggest example of this in 2022. That 2022 season started out for Chris Buescher and Brad Keselowski as a disaster. They couldn't break the top 30, top 25 was impossible for them the first half of that 2022 NASCAR season. When we moved over to the second half of that season, really that summer break, we got into the playoffs. Neither of those teams made the playoffs, but once again, you race every race, and Chris Buescher was able to pull out a win at Bristol, and Brad Keselowski was really fast as well. He, was probably going to win that race if it wasn't for some tire concerns, unfortunate events there, but they were fast in that second half of the year, and then started out 2023 really strong, and they did get some wins in 2023. So big deal there, right? I look at that as RCR. Can they try to do that? Can they try to turn around where the mistakes have been, right? Once again, when you're making a lot of mistakes, when everything's going wrong, you can point to certain things and say, hey, this is what we need to fix. This is what we need to do. And I think that's very possible for Kyle Busch and this RCR team. There are a couple concerns to me for Kyle Busch. And when I look at concerns, I think of a couple of things. I think of distractions for Kyle Busch, right? Things have not gone well for Kyle Busch in the last few years. His energy drink went out of business. Obviously, he had to sell his truck team from leaving RCR and Toyota to Spire. Those are things I don't think Kyle Busch wanted to do, but they were the best for him. But his biggest distraction is probably going to be his family, right? I was reading a book by Joe Gibbs earlier, and Gibbs explained that Busch is so talented and so naturally gifted because all he thinks about is racing. He races every day of the week. He races multiple NASCAR races. This was back when he was racing Xfinity Truck Series races. That to me really, I was like, okay, that makes sense why Kyle Busch could win so much. He has kind of lost that, right? He has to put more effort into his family, into his son, into his daughter, and I think that is a distraction for Kyle Busch. I'm not saying that's a bad distraction. I think that's a good thing for his life, but that could hinder some of the numbers when you look at NASCAR Cup Series racing. That could make it to where he doesn't quite get as many wins because he can't focus all of his efforts on racing like really any driver can when they're at a younger age. So that could hinder the numbers as well. That could prevent him from winning as much or reaching his full talented potential in 2025. Another disadvantage I see for Kyle Busch is really the next-gen car, right? This is not a car that fits his driving style. I've heard a few other comments from some other experts in the garage saying that Kyle Busch typically drives the rear of the race car, and this car is not really built for that. This is a very difficult car to drive. It's more strategic bound. It's very hard to push the limit, right? You make a mistake and you hit that limit, chances are you're going to wreck and you're going to be out of the event. Where in previous cars, you might could hit that limit, you'd hit the wall, slide a little bit, but you could save it. This is not the car for Kyle Busch. This car favors other drivers, that's for sure. It favors guys like Logano, probably Ryan Blaney, probably a few others that I can name off the top of my head. Ross Chastain, Tyler Reddick. This car probably favors them way more than it does the legend Kyle Busch, but it would be interesting to see if Kyle Busch could get this turned around. It's been a next-gen nightmare. This is the fourth year we're going to go into the next-gen car, and Kyle Busch has really struggled with this the first 3 years, and that's something unique, right? Because he has not struggled with previous cars. The car of tomorrow, the Gen 6, the Generation 4 Kyle Busch has driven. He did not struggle with those cars near as much as this one, so it'll be interesting to see if Busch could find a way to come back. Obviously, the lack of practice, the lack of qualifying time, the lack of on-track time before the actual race itself is probably also a disadvantage to Kyle Busch, because that was previously known as a time where Kyle Busch would start the race with start the weekend with not the fastest car. In fact, a lot of times he would be one of the slower cars on the racetrack, and then he would propel it and make it better by reporting things to engineers. So certainly times have changed in Kyle Busch's disadvantage. That has not been great for Kyle Busch. The things that have changed, they've sort of taken his abilities and sort of handicapped him a little bit. But I still think cannot underestimate the driver of this number 8 machine. I think he's a dominant driver. He's probably one of the best drivers just with natural talent ever to step into a race car. And it should be interesting to see. But that's it, really all I wanted to talk about. Once again, the offseason has been a little slower than I anticipated it would be. When some big news comes out, we'll obviously get back on it and we'll explain everything and dive into it. But that's it, all I wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you think. Can Kyle Busch get back on par, get back to winning multiple races a year, or do you think that Kyle Busch has sort of hit a slump and he's not going to recover from it, sort of like a Jimmy Johnson in the late stages of his career? But that's it. Like and subscribe if you like the video. Please share the video if you do. I really appreciate it. And of course, let's get rowdy.